Hi, and welcome to Fulfilling Career Happy Life. So glad you tuned in for this season of the show, A Seat at the Table. I'm inviting an executive to join me and do some reflections on their career so that the rest of us can learn from their own experience. And today I am thrilled to welcome Kavya Gopal. Kavya and I worked together in a previous life, so I was very fortunate to be in each other's orbit earlier in our careers and have recently done some work with her team. So I've gotten to see her in action, which makes it even more of a pleasure for me to have her. Kavya's early experience, she actually started in market research and analytics back with GSK, which she'll bring full circle to the present. Held a lot of various sales leadership positions, marketing operations, and then leadership roles in the primary care space and specialty, and then has spent significant time in the oncology and hematology space, including 5 years as general manager of. I'm not sure I'm gonna get it right, Kavya. It's the hematology space in the
Yep.
U.S. within
Yes.
Novartis. Do I have
Yep.
that right?
Exactly. Yes.
Okay, great. And then the last year, she's brought it full circle back to GSK. She's currently the Senior Vice President and head of the U.S. Oncology Business Unit. I mentioned that I've had the pleasure of working with Kavya's team. And the thing that I can say that stands out so much about Kavya is that she's such a genuine leader and she's truly collaborative with her team. And she's confident enough. I mean, look, she's got a huge amount of experience, super smart lady, knows a lot of the answers, but is very confident if the team should come up with the answer herself if she doesn't have it, but she's confident that the path forward, they'll figure out the path forward. And I think that even strengthens her leadership. So you can tell I'm a fan. Really happy to welcome you, Kavya. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Randy, for having me. I love contributing to things like this because I think back to when I started my career, and there are things I wish somebody had told me and things that I wish I knew, and would it have made a difference? I don't know, but always happy to share a little bit of wisdom, albeit hindsight. So
Well, and that's exactly the spirit that in which I'm doing this season. So that's absolutely perfect place to start. So the questions I'm going to ask you are really in reflecting back on your career. What would you say was your single biggest challenge?
So my single biggest challenge is, and I say is because I think this is continues to be the case, is remembering that I have earned my seat at the table. And literally, like this is the conversation, right? And I'll give you two examples. Early in my career, I always felt like when if I was in the room with an executive group, I had a chief of staff type role at one point, and I'd be sitting around in the room, and I would intentionally not sit at the table because I didn't feel like my role was significant enough to have a seat at the table, even though I was working with all the people around the table, etc. And then even later in my career too, where I was trying to prep, I think, my boss for a board meeting, and she essentially pushed me to say, "Well, what do you think?" I was like, "Well, I'm giving you all the information for you to make the decision." Her point back to me is like, "No, you're. I want you to be the one to tell me what you think we should do. What is your recommendation?" But it's that balancing act of like, I have the information, I have a point of view, but is my point of view okay to be shared? Is my point of view relevant enough to the conversation? And this is I think an ongoing challenge that I've had. But I will say it's probably the second incident that I talked about. I remember at almost a turning point in that conversation where it suddenly flipped, that it's like for me in my head saying, actually, I don't know why I'm not doing it, right? It's completely in my own head. Nobody has told me that I shouldn't, right? And usually people ask my opinion. People want to know what I think and what my recommendation is. But it was very internal. It wasn't like an external force that said that I shouldn't do it, but very internal of feeling like, okay, I'm here and I've earned this and I do know what I'm talking about. And that own internal confidence of, yeah, I can say it, right? I might not have an opinion about everything, and that's okay, but it's actually okay um, to share my point of view, to be a voice, a stronger voice in the room versus just not feeling like I'm just a single voice in the room. And I feel like that's really flipped a lot of things for me in the last probably 7 to 10 years of how I show up in anything, from a work standpoint. It's been refreshing too, because it does feel like you take off your boundaries, um, and so that you can feel like you're truly contributing. Because I think that's the other side of it is, yes, you feel like you have a seat at the table, but you also want to feel like you're contributing to something and that you have a role in shaping something that's going to happen for the future. And if you don't feel like you can speak up, how are you ever going to have a role in that shaping? So,
Wow, there's so much in what you just shared. Thank you. It's really interesting because, in a hierarchical structure, which so many corporations are, sometimes we wait to be invited in.
mhm.
And you were fortunate because you were invited in and you had enough self-awareness to sort of learn that lesson. But I think it's really important for us as leaders to recognize sometimes we do need to reach over and invite the person in, because that operations are kind of chief of staff
Right.
role that you had, that I had early in my career.
Mhm.
You can view that one of two ways. You can view that almost as an elevated admin. And I say that with no lack of respect to
Mhm.
admins, but you can view yourself as the administrative person that moves information around and facilitates the leader, or you can view that as the step that it can be. And when you made that shift, it seems like it really unlocked things for you. And
Absolutely.
and you seamlessly got to what my next question was. So rather than ask the question, I just want to comment on it, which is, work with so many executives, even people who, like yourself, super accomplished. And there's ways that we get in our own way.
Yep.
And I'm so happy for you. And I think you were so lucky in that, having that awareness somewhat early to get out of your own way and to use your words, take the self-imposed boundaries off and give yourself that permission structure to really lean into it. And look where it's gotten you. Now you are the person that has the chief of staff, right?
Exactly, exactly. I will. I'll make one other comment on this one. It's interesting because I have a great support system with my family and so on. And one of my biggest cheerleaders is probably my mom, and she, as moms are, right? But she definitely reminds me of this on a regular basis. She's like, remember what your role is. Remember what you can do and what you can impact, right, in her own way. And it's she understands the industry to some extent, but it's actually more about knowing what I'm capable of and having that voice like in the background that there's a little bit of a cheerleader, right? And that goes a long way too, of course, right? So
Well, and the beauty of that is, and I know how close you are to your mother, you have that safe space, I'll call it, where you can share those doubts sometimes. You can be there and get that helpful reminder or whatever. And it's a great reminder for our listeners that to reach out, to bring those people around you, the trusted mentor, the colleagues, people you've worked with, friends, partners, whatever
yeah,
it is. We we need to get out of our own head and let some other voices in. You're very lucky.
yeah, absolutely, I
Yeah,
am.
that's good. Tell your mom that. Call her later and tell her
I
we were
will.
talking about her and you're lucky. Kavya, what has surprised you about your career journey?
Hmm. The surprise is probably how much of it has gone to plan, versus what could have happened. And I'll give a bit of background. So probably about 15 years ago, yeah, it's probably about 15 years ago. I put together a development plan to have a conversation with my manager at the time, and also HR as well. And the development plan was very much about what are the types of experiences that I want to get over the next X amount of time. It wasn't necessarily about, oh, every this is the specific job I want. It was more about, hey, I would really like to be in a more of a general management type role in the future, whatever that looks like. But these are the experiences that I think would help me get there, right? It would help me become a better leader at that level, a better subject matter expert, depending on the topic at that level. I'd already been a sales rep for a while. I'd done market research. I'd been in marketing. I'd done the chief of staff role. And I was moving into a different division within our organization and was really thinking through, okay, what does my next 10 years look like? Um, and there were very specific experiences. There were things like getting some P&L management experience, getting global experience, and getting large scale people leadership experience.
Mhm.
Now, those seem very broad, right? But I didn't have specific roles in mind because I didn't want to limit myself to say, well, I want that job next, because that wasn't what was in my head. I was thinking about, oh, if I want to be my boss's boss, right, in the future, what are some of the things that they're telling me that they learned the most in, right? And what are some of the skills that they're utilizing that I need to get exposure to, right? It's not necessarily about I have to do it for 10 years to become an expert. It's understanding enough to be able to ask good questions and having enough background in the situation. So I laid that out. And I think because I was so specific in terms of the type of experience, and I'd actually said no to roles in that process that maybe at some point would have led to it, but they weren't the thing that I was really looking for. Um, that's, I think, how much of it went according to plan is still a bit of a surprise to me because it doesn't always go according to plan. And it was also choices that I made that I was like, well, I don't know if this is going to be the way it goes, right? This might lead to something, this might not. And in some cases, it did lead to the thing that I wanted to do. In some cases, it was a completely different detour that I had to take. But broadly, I think it went according to plan. So I'll give you two examples there. Um, I wanted to get P&L experience, and
Mhm.
that happened ultimately when I was a business unit head in the UK, like truly owning the business, having my own team, managing everything for that part of the business. But that was about 7, 8 years after I'd written this plan, right? I had actually gone to global after a couple of years after I'd written this plan and got global experience in marketing, and which was unbelievable. Also got to live in another country with that, and same with the P&L experience role. And then after that, I actually took a lateral move after the UK role, took a lateral move because it was a personal choice of wanting to get back to the US.
Mhm.
And if I had stayed, for example, in the UK role, could it have led to something where it was a true like a country GM role? Potentially, but it was a personal choice of, okay, I've been out of the country for 5 years. I think it's time to go back. And it was a choice to take a lateral move to go back to the US into a marketing role in oncology. And that role had its own positives because it was it was something new. It was a new challenge, but it was also getting exposure to broader picture things within the US market. It wasn't exactly P&L experience. It wasn't a global role. It wasn't even large scale leadership at that point. But my sidetrack, my detour actually from there after being successful in that led to the next role, which was large scale people leadership. It was building my brand and leadership trust that this was a role that I had the agility and also the leadership capabilities to take on a sales head role for a different part of our organization. And that wouldn't have been the plan, right? That in my head, would that have been exactly how it worked? No, it wouldn't. And then even from there to the role I'm in today, I probably took like 2 or 3 different steps to get there. I led a transformation for Novartis in the U.S. and which was not part of the plan in any sense. And I can honestly say that I wasn't sure if I was going to have a role after that transformation in the organization, and I
Yeah,
was
I've been
okay.
there.
Yeah, exactly, and I was okay with that, and that makes a huge difference mentally on how you show up for whatever the project is, right? And that I was okay. It's like, you know what? I've had a great run. I can always find something else type thing. But that transformation was a great learning experience too. But from there, like, okay, well, what do I do next? And that was when the general manager role actually came up, and that was unique in and of itself because our whole structure was fundamentally different, and it was a lot of matrix leadership and leading by influence and not actually having a team. So if I think about my original plan, like those 3 experiences I wanted to get, technically I'd gotten those 3 experiences, but the role I'm in today is the one that really applies all 3 of those things to my day-to-day job. So my biggest surprise is that how much of it went to plan despite a few detours here and there. But I think all detours are a good thing because I feel like personally, you don't, if you like where you are today, you can't fault anything that happened that got you here because those are the things that got you here. So.
Oh, thank you for sharing all of that. Some of the things that really stand out for me in what you said, and I love so much. I advise clients this way a lot, which is you had goals. You knew specific experience you wanted to get out of it. You mentioned the P&L, leading larger teams, but you didn't have a specific job that needed to meet that requirement. And so it kept you much more open to what the organization needed and some of those turns
Yep.
and the willingness to take a lateral move. I think sometimes our ego pushes against that when it can be, I mean, it met a different need you have. It got you back to the US, which you wanted
Yes.
to do, and then it took off from there. And so, you know, the twist, the way I think about the twists and turns too is looking back on it, it's like it's not like everything happens for a reason. I don't have that sort of, faith in the divine that some people have. It's more like everything that happens, you can find the reason and provide a beautiful story of that. So I'm so glad you shared it. Knowing what you know now,
Mhm.
would you change your approach to risk?
Um, Probably earlier in my career, not later in my career, because I think I was much more comfortable taking the risks later in my career. I think earlier on, I did feel like I needed to be on a specific path, right? Like it was, if I think about my first 5 to 10 years, it was about, okay, what's the next role? Like what's the right order of things? Um, and trying to stick to that as much as possible because I didn't know any different. And I was looking at people around me who, well, this is the path they follow. Um, and I will share that there was a point in time when my approach to risk fundamentally changed because I was actually frustrated with my, I'll call it my career progression, for lack of a better term, where I
You
felt
felt
like
it wasn't happening fast enough?
I felt it wasn't happening. I felt like I wasn't getting the opportunities that I thought I should that I thought I should get, let's be honest, like that I thought I should get and that I wanted to get. And it wasn't working. So I was like, okay, well, what's the harm in trying something different? And that's actually the time point when I moved from the branded side of things to our generics and biosimilar
Hmm.
side of the business, which at the time, and this was around the time we knew each other, Randy, like this was, why would you do that? There was a whole, like,
Yeah.
this was before the, this was around the time of like big patent cliffs happening in the industry, things like that. And I recognized that I had no idea about what this other part of our industry in pharmaceuticals actually worked, and how it worked, and was more out of curiosity that I decided to take a leap. So it was a risk because I didn't know where it was going to go from there. I took the risk because there was one or two people who were in that side of the business that I had worked with before. So it didn't feel as I was doing something completely new, and it was still in the same organization. So it was risky, but it was less risky. But it probably wouldn't have been something that I would have done until I felt a bit of that frustration, which I think is also a learning too, where um, I feel like you move faster and you're more quick to make decisions when you feel like you are stuck, when you feel like you've got to make a change. At least that's the case for me. Otherwise, I'm very comfortable, right? I'll keep doing what I'm doing, and I'm very comfortable. But sometimes the comfort being comfortable is actually to your detriment because you don't push yourself to see if there's some other opportunities, right? Even staying within an organization for a really long time is being comfortable that but you don't know what else is out there. And I'm not saying that you have to always be looking outside. I think it's more of a self-awareness on being willing to take a chance of trying something different. But that requires, for me, it required me to be a little uncomfortable, to be willing to take that leap. And it was great for me because that was a detour, but it actually created a whole nother path that I wasn't sure, that I didn't even realize could exist. Um, it gave me an understanding of a completely different side of the business that I never would have gotten if I had stayed on what I'll call the branded side of things. It actually took me to a global role, to more of a P&L role, and offered me opportunities that I normally wouldn't have thought of. And some of that context also is the I'll call it the pool of talent that you're a part of. And this, when you're younger in your career, also makes a difference. Sometimes it is easier to be a bigger fish in a small pond than a smaller fish in a big pond. in order to get what you want. And I think those are things to consider and choices that you have to make where you might not get the title right that you're looking for, but maybe you get the experience you're looking for, and maybe it creates a pathway to something else depending on how you want to consider it. And it's not about internal competition; it's really around the number of opportunities that are available in different situations. So when you're in a smaller organization, you're jack of all trades. You get to do a lot of different things. But guess what? Your title probably is not the title that you want. When you're a bigger organization, you might get the title you want, but you might not get all the experiences that you could get in a smaller organization. And those are things to really consider around your own development, and how what you think is going to make you grow, right? My time on our generics and biosimilars part of the business it was hard. Like it was a whole different world. Like my budgets were small. Um, we didn't really have big teams. And I remember when I was coming back to the US, I remember seeing my A&P budget, my marketing budget. I was like, this feels like it has an extra zero or two at the end of it, because that really is what it was. But I also looked at it and said, there's things that I've done that are relevant today. Actually, there's a situation that I'm dealing with right now where something that I did as it relates to launch readiness in a previous life, right, actually gives me some background information about a situation I'm dealing with today. So you you can't take anything that you do as not worthwhile. At some point in time, if you're staying in the same industry, like it all comes back full circle.
Yeah.
But to come back to your original question of do I see risk differently? Yes, I'm more willing to take risks today. Early in my career, I was not willing to take the risk because I felt like that there was like a very linear path. And then I actually had to get frustrated to actually be willing to make a change and to sort of veer off that linear path. Um, and that made a huge difference for me. Like it worked out. It could not have worked out, and I would have been okay with that too at that point, because it was a choice that I was making for myself. It wasn't something that I was being told to do. And I think that lens also makes a difference,
Yeah.
when it's your choice and not somebody else
Yeah.
telling you this is what you have to do.
For sure. I want to reflect on a couple of things you said because there's such themes that in what I see. Those of us that come out of big companies, one of the things you're blessed with, in my opinion, if they're doing it right, is a lot of development programs and investment in career path for high potential folks and that kind of thing. And that's great, but it's somewhat dependent on the track they see for you, which may be your boss, right?
Mhm.
And in that situation, bosses change. You're working with different people. The reality is they almost always have your best interests at heart, but really they have the best interests of the company at heart. And you got to be your own best advocate. You got to ask for what you want. Everybody's got a different path. I love that now. Everybody has a different path, and you may have to carve out your own and see how those choices serve you. And it may mean going in a different direction than you're being told is, to use your word, right. So, but I think like that can be of benefit to folks that are listening earlier in their careers because you and I learned that one through, the School of
Yeah,
Hard Knocks, right?
yeah, exactly, exactly. And
One,
oops, sorry.
and please.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think it's a balancing act, right? It's not about jumping around to different roles. I do think like you've got to build a skill set, right? And sometimes it just requires you to be like in one place to get a couple of different experiences to really, build that baseline. So I think that's also a watch out too, because sometimes I see people who are jumping around, and literally it's because they're interested in the next title versus what the next experience really is. And I think that's my biggest thing is think about the experience, not about the title. Listen, I spent probably 10 to 15 years at literally the same level in my career. There were different jobs, but it was the same level, quote unquote. And that was okay, right? Did I love it the whole time? No. But I look back on it, I was like, actually, that was not a bad thing because it allows me to get a lot of experiences. And because the further up you go in your career, the harder it is to step back and try something different.
Yeah. Yeah, so you got to broaden enough in the at the base. It's like a building.
Yep, exactly.
Um, yeah. Another thing that you said that, I mean, people who read my stuff know I'm a huge fan of discomfort and using it as fuel. And you described that as well. There were moments that you were feeling uncomfortable or even frustrated, and you used that as fuel for the next thing. That's
Yes,
great.
absolutely.
Um, Knowing all that you know now, what is something that you worried about that, like, now you realize wasn't worth worrying about?
Ooh. That's definitely an moment. I, the thing that I worried about is, I worry about it a lot less now, is internal competition,
Internal within the company?
internal within the company, because I was I was lucky enough, and I did work for it, right? I was lucky enough to be seen as a talent in the organization or in the early days, but so were a lot of other people. So when it came to opportunities, it always felt a little bit like internal competition of who's getting that role, right? Who's getting that next step? And it's it's the old adage of like you run your own race, right? And that's not a realization I necessarily had earlier in my career. Where you look around, it's like, well, why did that person get promoted? And I get this question from people a lot nowadays too. It's like all the examples people when I'm having mentoring conversations share about, well, this person didn't have this, but they got this, right? It's very much looking around and saying, comparing yourself to somebody at your who's essentially a peer doesn't really get you anywhere, because there's so many reasons why things happen the way they do. Um, and thinking about, well, what is it that you want to accomplish? It doesn't matter about the level and whether they're getting promoted first or you're getting promoted later and all of that. I used to worry a lot about that, I think, early in my career, because what else was there? Like when you're 25, 26 years old and you're looking at, are you is your career working? That was the thing that you would look at, is back then, is, okay, am I getting promoted to the next level and how quickly am I getting promoted? Think over time, when you get the different sets of experiences, and I will say, you have to get to a certain level where you feel like you're not stuck, right? I think that every organization has that kind of level of, it's not quite like a manager level, it's not a VP level, it's somewhere in the middle, where you feel like, okay, I'm contributing to things and I'm learning different things, but I'm also I have an active role to play in the organization, the job. Those early days of that competition, you just get in your own head. It's completely unnecessary, and I'm not saying anybody will ever get over that, or not do it. I think it's human nature. But then you get to a point, I got to a point where it was really about my own race. It wasn't about looking around me saying, well, who are my peers and what has happened with them. It was more about, well, what do I actually want to accomplish? What is the impact that I want to have on the people I work with, and business. And nowadays, right, 25 some years of being in industry, thinking about, okay, whenever it is that I choose to move on and do something different, right, what is it that I want to be remembered for? It is a little bit of the legacy topic, but it's not legacy in the sense of what I'm leaving behind, but it's how have I impacted others versus me competing with others. And that that just changes how you approach things every day as well, and where you dedicate your time and your energy.
Yeah, that's really rich. I think, you know, most of us have been in a position where we went for something we wanted and didn't get it. And the truth is that that serves you somehow. There's more that you need to learn where you are. The other thing wouldn't have set you up for success as much. You wouldn't be available for the thing that's around the corner that you didn't see. The problem is we don't get to see from today how that
Mhm.
serves us. We got to have faith and wait for it to come, and then you look for it.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Are there other leaders that you follow, books or podcasts that are helpful for you that you can recommend?
So I listen to random podcasts. I don't necessarily listen to like one set of series of podcasts, or even read a specific set of books. I will say there are leaders that I look to internally, but also externally, where there's something about them that I appreciate, right? It's not necessarily one type of leader. Um, I I'll give a couple of examples. So back in the day, so at one point, the former chairman of J&J used to be at Novartis,
I
and
know he was my mentor there. I felt so lucky.
yeah, and he's somebody who, you know, you when he's somebody who essentially you just had this loyalty to, like you would run through a wall, and it was really how he showed up with every level in the organization, and regardless of what their role was, and how he, I think, essentially made people feel seen is how I would call it. So I think that's like a lesson taken from him, right? I would say you look at leaders like an Indra Nui, who used to run PepsiCo, very unusual leader, from a background standpoint and so on. But she, if you think about it, she actually came from a consulting background and ended up at Pepsi. So that's not, that's not a typical thing, but the fact that she, made a lot of changes in the company and really drove growth in the company and a different agenda for the company is worth looking at. And for her, it was also about being somebody who was not your typical profile of a CEO, right? Literally a typical picture of a CEO, and how she held her own in in amongst a peer group of very larger than life individuals, and holding your own in that situation, having your own point of view, and being true to yourself. I think she's somebody that I've listened to as example, in terms of examples of how she's approached things. The other people too, I think, are more people that I've come across in my own career. My current boss, who runs US for GSK, I use the phrase like she is as advertised. She is very much about giving her leaders autonomy and and supporting them, and very much a way that I want to emulate with my own team is I trust that I have the right people to do the work and that the right minds are on the table. I don't need to micromanage it, right? I will say that is still a challenge for me because I like to roll up my sleeves, but I need to remind myself that I have great people on my team who can actually do things really well. But she's somebody who I look at and say the mindset that creates and the culture that creates is so different than when you feel like you're having to constantly like report into things all the time, versus having the freedom to say, "Yep, I've got this. What do you need to know?" Like keeping each other informed, but yeah, you've got this. Go figure it out and go take care of it. So those are some of the examples. I also tend to be somebody who just loves like fables and stuff too, right? Like old time stories, and thinking about you have like the David and Goliaths, and you also have different poets and stuff where it just gives you inspiration, where it's not necessarily about leadership, but it's really around how do you see yourself, how do you show up in the world around you, and what is the impact that you can have individually. So though I can't give you a specific set of books, but just some examples of positive interactions that I've
Yeah.
had, or that that I've come across, that have definitely shaped how I think about how I want to show up as a leader. Like which versions of those things, which parts of those things do I want to take and make my own? And how does that translate to how people perceive me, how people feel me, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
One of the things that I love so much is that your current boss is on that list. I don't hear that often. And it doesn't mean there aren't great bosses out there, but the fact that she came to mind for you, I'm happy for you that you're in that kind of a situation.
It's I'm in a lucky position with her, and also with the leadership team that I work with. We're the idea of your first team. We talked about this when you came to
Yeah.
spend time with my team.
Yep.
Um, the team I work with, the leadership, my peer group, they live by that, and it's actually really great to see it because you don't see it very often.
Yeah. That's so great. That's so great. Kavya, as we wrap up, any other thoughts that you have? You could think about it from like what would you tell your younger self, or just things that have occurred to you during our discussion that you'd like to share?
The two things that I would encourage people to think about is being clear about what you think you want so that people can help you achieve it. I think that's the hardest thing
When you
that
say being clear, it's like tell them, ask for
yeah,
it kind of thing.
yeah.
Okay.
Tell them, ask for it, and be specific around whether it's the experience or whether it's a type of role, whatever it might be. Be clear, because people will be willing to help if they know what you're looking for, and they'll obviously give you advice to get there. What I find with people I mentor is a lot of times it's about a title and not about an experience, right? And if it's about like, well, why can't I get to this next level versus not that next level, but more about, okay, what are the things that will better equip me to compete differently, right? Or potentially get similar experience, but just in a different role. I see a lot of people focused on title. I would say think less about the title, more about what is the experience you want to get and why you want to get it, and people will be willing to help you to get there. The second thing is be confident in yourself. This is how I start. This is how we started off with our conversation. Is nobody can nobody can build that confidence in yourself except you. Yes, there's always going to be people who will give you a little bit of boost, right? But how you show up with that is completely dependent on you. You And yes, sometimes you do need to be invited to have a seat at the table, but guess what? Once you're in the room, just take it as tacit invitation that you should be in that room and that you can have a seat at that table. I think that's the nuance that took me a while to learn of what is it to be invited into the room versus what is it to truly have a voice at the table. And once you're invited to the room, it's in my mind, it's just an endorsement of, yeah, you're invited to the room because you're expected to have a voice at the table. And doesn't matter what your level is, doesn't matter if it's just one comment, right? But if you come at it that way, I think it builds your confidence earlier in your career, versus waiting 10, 15 years for that sort of revelation or that epiphany that I know I had a little bit later in my career.
That's great. I mean, because it's so true. When you get to a certain level in the in some ways at every level, but when you get to a certain level in the organization, it's not just that you have a seat at the table, it's you're expected to also have a voice. And we need to not hold ourselves back for that. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, so good. Kavya, thank you so much for the time and for joining me on the show. There's a lot here for people to learn from. I'm not surprised. It's the reason I wanted you on the show. But I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom with our listeners.
Well, Randy, it's great to talk to you again, and appreciate the invite. Hopefully, there's some nuggets that people can take back, and look forward to having it out there.
Thanks so much for listening to Fulfilling Career, Happy Life. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe, follow, rate, and review. Do all the things to show your support for this podcast. It helps other professionals who want to feel more energized about their work again find us. And if you want to take this thinking further, please follow me on LinkedIn, where I share content on a regular basis. You can also get on my email list by downloading the Career Satisfaction Assessment or through my website. All these links are in the show notes. Thanks again for tuning in. I truly appreciate that you make the time for yourself to listen to the show. See you next week.